All right, everyone. I'm here with Walid Abdo, coach, wrestling coach at ZAR FC and Melbourne Wrestling Academy. He's got a great background in nutrition and sports science, and he's just a machine as well. Walid, thanks for coming on, bro.
Thanks for having me, brother. I'm excited for this podcast. I saw your podcast with Connor Evans, and I thought that was amazing.
Yeah,
So
thanks, bro.
yeah, covered some
Thanks.
really
Yeah,
good topics. So I'm keen to share some stuff.
yeah, for sure, bro. I'm excited too. So we'll start from the start, right?
Mm.
You've been training a very long time. You've been in the scene a very long time, wrestling. But tell
Mm.
me how you actually came into it in the beginning,
Yeah,
and just talk me through that.
yeah. Well, I guess my training journey probably started very young because I come from a family of athletes. My cousins Ali and Bill, Um, obviously they did wrestling and competed at a very high level. And then also on my mother's side, they're from my dad's side. On my mother's side, all my uncles and cousins, they were all training and competing in wrestling as well, and doing weightlifting, always hitting the gym. So it was very common. And obviously back then we didn't have phones and stuff, and that was very limited for us because I come from a very strict family. So training and study was pretty much all we did. Training, study, and religion. They were the top
Mm.
three in the house, right? Even training was a privilege, right? Study and religion was number one. Um, so yeah, my brother and I, we loved to train because it was a bit of an outlet for us, and we were allowed to do it. Um, and so my brother, he would do his boxing, and then I would. I think at the time we were doing a bit of wrestling and playing rugby, and then going to the gym. Anyway, I was very skinny at the time, very small, and I was too small to play rugby, and even any of those power sports were very difficult for me because I was too skinny and weak, and that prompted me to start lifting weights. So I lifted weights for a very long time to put on some muscle mass and strength, and then went back to rugby, and then wrestling, and then stopped playing rugby and kept doing wrestling, and that's where I'm at now. So yeah, um, wrestling and obviously keeping fit and strong in the gym.
Awesome, bro. And
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, you've gone pretty deep into that, like that exercise science side as well.
yeah, yeah,
Do you think that that was influenced by growing up a little bit skinnier? Because I mean, if anyone looked at you now, they wouldn't think you grew up as a skinny kid, you know?
yeah, yeah. Oh man, I was just always thirsty and friggin' hungry for knowledge. Like I
Yeah.
just wanted to get things right. I'm a very obsessed person,
Mm.
and I like to get things right. And the people around me weren't giving me the right answers, and I was getting weird. I wasn't getting the results I wanted. So I was constantly just looking up, searching out or seeking out the correct answers and different ways of doing things. And one thing led to another, and I ended up. Well, I actually studied electrical engineering, and I was working full time as an electrical engineer. I worked for about 3 years, and then I actually left that because of how obsessed I was with training and sports science. So I left that job and I enrolled back into university and studied nutrition and sports science. And then, went on that journey as well. And once I, got that knowledge, obviously I applied it and, did the coaching and stuff. But I also applied it to myself. So,
Mm.
yeah, I've always been very obsessed in that sense.
Yeah, it's awesome, bro. Like
Mm.
seeing that thirst for knowledge in people, especially as a coach, as someone in the industry, martial arts and stuff like that. There's a lot of people who don't really take it as seriously as that, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, yeah, so it's good to see that, and you've obviously taken it very far, and I think you're in a unique position considering your upbringing and coming from a family that was heavily involved in the sport, and
yeah.
also that mixture of having your brother who, like, you're close in age, right?
Yeah, twins. We're
Yeah.
actually twins.
Yeah. Oh, you're twins. Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah,
I didn't know you were twins.
yeah,
Well, that's sick. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
having your brother and, you're both kind of leveling each other up. I think you're
yeah,
in a really unique position that you've had a lot of input that really made you like flourish as
mm,
someone who's knowledgeable in the sport and in certain parts of the nutrition and sports science aspect, obviously. So
mm,
it's a really um it's a really interesting point of view that you can give that not a lot of people can give because they don't have
mm,
that knowledge, that experience. So that's why,
mm.
I can't wait to hear more of your philosophies and your experience on
Yeah,
uh these sorts of topics. So um I want to talk about actually having your brother. I didn't know you were twins.
yeah,
That's sick.
yeah, yeah,
One thing I've noticed, especially with high level athletes,
yeah.
if you look in the UFC, you got like the first example off the top of my head is the Topuria brothers.
Yes,
Like having a brother to be able to train with and to be able to, practice on even, I think
yes,
that makes a massive difference. And the same thing with just training partners in general.
yeah.
Like a lot of
Yeah.
people might not have the right training partners. How much do you think like having that, you know, the brother and the right people around you, how much do you think that affects getting to a high level in like combat sports?
Massive in sport and in life. Like
Yeah.
my brother was growing up was the sole motivation for me to excel because my brother was always smarter, stronger. You know, he was like perfect, right? He was nailing all the high achievers awards. He was strong as he was an amazing boxer, right? He was very interested in combat sports from a very young age. He's got photos of him at friggin' 6 with his hands up, and he was a natural talent, very powerful and skillful. So I always looked up to my brother growing up, and I'm like, fuck, man, I'm not doing. I was a bit of a class clown. I had, ADHD and stuff. I was very distracting in class, and it wasn't until maybe year 9 or 10 where I turned things around academically and, in sport and stuff as well. Um, and started to compete with my brother, right? And yeah, yeah, he was massive. He was massive as a motivator. Without him, I'm not sure if I probably would have excelled as much. Yeah, because it's good. It's very good in any dynamic to have competition. Healthy competition. And my brother set the bar in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think having that competition, competitive aspect is very important for like
Yeah,
athletes, especially for I mean through all ages, in order
yeah,
for you to level up.
yeah. And
And do
he
you
was
think?
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
eight.
like, bro. Sorry,
He was
go.
no, sorry, I'll just quickly say
Yeah,
at 18 he was a unit, like very,
yeah.
very well developed for 18, and I was this skinny little scrawny long necked cunt. You know what I mean? And I was like, fuck, this guy got all the
Yeah.
good genetics and I got nothing. So I worked very hard.
Yeah, well, like it's interesting that like so I mean, I can relate to you in the aspect of like not being naturally gifted at anything, like
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
came
yeah.
hard for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So I actually think that's interesting the way it creates athletes. Like if you're not natural, talented and fast or explosive, and if you don't have natural aptitude,
Mm,
I feel like that influences the way that you um, pick up certain knowledge and stuff like that. It might, you have to learn how to learn in a way.
yeah, yeah, for sure,
So,
man.
what do
Yeah.
you think is the thing that changed you in sort of learning how to learn and the science of acquiring those skills that
Mm,
was different for you? Maybe it wasn't as natural and you weren't as athletic as maybe, other people around you. And
mm.
how did that sort of influence you to seek out those those learning curves, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think I set very simple goals, right? And I learned to enjoy pursuing them. You know what I mean? So, for example, in rugby and the wrestling, I was very weak and scrawny, very skinny, and I knew I had to get strong. I knew I had to get fit, and I was determined to achieve those two things, right? And then I found ways to enjoy that, right? And then 5-10 years down the track, you're fit and you're strong as you possibly can be. And then once you reach that goal, you say, okay, what's next? And obviously, when the wrestling comes in, that shapes my entire approach. I mean, there were times where I'd try and wrestle when I was younger, between the ages of 16 and I'd say 16 and 20. It was extremely difficult for me because I was probably a little bit more ignorant and didn't respect the sport, or was more in like an instant sort of gratitude frame of mind. I didn't realize how long it was going to take to get good, and I had to be patient. So if I went to training and I got bashed, which is what would happen a lot, obviously being a beginner, you get smashed when you're in a room full of incredible wrestlers. Especially at that time, you had amazing wrestlers at Sam Parker's gym and in that community. A lot of Europeans and stuff. You go home and you beat yourself up. You're just like, fuck, now I'm a pussy. I'm a weak cunt. I'm this. I'm that, and it put you off if you were a high achiever, right? And how my approach changed in my mid-20s was I stopped thinking that way, and then I started focusing on learning and just getting better, right? And I dropped the ego. I left it at home, right? And if I was at wrestling and I got beat, rather than go home and dwell on the emotions of losing and this and that, I'd just sit down and get like a bit of journaling. I tried that out. That was great. And I say, okay, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And then I'd say, okay, for example, I'm not finishing the single leg properly. And then I'd seek out how to do that. I'd set some goals around that. How do I finish a single leg from the bottom position, from the top position? I'd ask my cousins, Ali and Bill, my coaches, and say, hey, I'm getting stuck here, as opposed to just rocking up the next session, getting super, jacked and high, on caffeine and try to just, thrash myself again, which is what I do a lot of. So I guess I just switched from an ego sort of fear-based approach to a learning and, a more realistic approach for me. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like a lot of people listening will be able to relate to that aspect of like, I mean, we've all had bad sparring sessions, bad training sessions where we get bashed, and, it can really affect people. And a lot of the time people can even quit because of, a few bad sessions. It's important to be able to navigate around those bad sessions and try and, I guess, squeeze as much, learning and as much good as possible out of those sessions. Because, I mean, they're the ones where you learn the most.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, like what you said, taking that systematic approach, like of identifying what your weaknesses are and trying to work on them. I mean, do you find like working on like one thing at a time and being very specific about that to be the best, or do you take a more holistic approach, or do you sort of combine it? I want to know how you think is the best way for anyone that's listening to really dial in their game and, I guess, get as good as they can as fast as they can.
Yeah, that's massive because having come back to wrestling in my mid-20s, I realized, you haven't got a lot of time left, right? Or you probably do now, you see wrestlers competing in mid to late 30s. But from a wrestling perspective and just sport in general, my approach is I look at the skills that are required to perform the sport at a beginner, intermediate, advanced level. I take those skills and I just try and make them very few, right? Because by doing that, you can just you can learn at a much faster rate, as opposed to just rocking up to training and doing all a bunch of different things and not really heading in any direction, or you're focusing on 50 different things and never really getting good at anything, right? So I would take those skills, whether it be single leg, right? For example, single leg, extremely common position. You're in that position 90% of the time. So I would take that and say, okay, I really need to get good at finishing the single leg and defending the single leg. And I would focus on that for X number of months. Okay. And
Mm.
I would say, okay, how much time have I would judge my ability by how much time I've spent in that position, right? If I've spent, 3 months in that position, I'm going to get good at it. You know what I mean? And if I'm lacking somewhere, then I'll ask myself the question: how much time have I spent in the front headlock position in the last 6 months? Probably, I'll say to myself, "Fuck, probably one session." So I'll switch the goal up a little bit and say, "Hey, I need to spend more time there." That's been my approach. I've looked at what are the most, well, for me, what are the most common positions, the most common techniques, and the high percentage finishes and defensive actions, and I just focus on them. And they're very few. They are, very few, techniques and positions from there. So, whereas I think in the earlier days, I reckon I was just focusing on too many and a lot of uncommon positions that you'll probably never find yourself in and wasting too much time there. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
I feel like a lot of people, especially maybe younger guys or in the gyms,
Mm.
they're trying to do all the, flashy stuff, learn 100 different takedowns,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
But I mean, yeah, just focusing on those basics, and then, if you encounter something that, you know do you sort of go along, like, as you encounter things, instead of just like looking back on how much time you spent in positions?
Mm.
Do you like see what you encounter in training or in comps that you sort of struggled with, and then focus from there as well?
Um, yeah, I probably in the earlier days I was a bit more reactive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, but probably now I've I've learned from a lot of the American systems, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
instructionals online and their curriculums, because they
Mm-hmm.
have a set curriculum. There's no guesswork in what they do, right?
Yeah.
They don't just rock up and just do a session and just whatever they feel
Mm-hmm.
like. They've got
Yeah.
it all laid out for the next 4 to 6 years, so you know
Mm.
exactly what you're doing up to a certain point. And I look at all those programs, and I've noticed that they just focus on a very, a very very few set skills, right? And when you look at them,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, this is so fucking basic, all right? But
Yeah.
that's the point. You know what I mean? It's supposed to. We hear a lot of, we hear about that a lot. Like, you focus on the basics and just stick to them, because they're the ones that are going to serve you across all levels throughout your career: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. They transfer across all levels. Whereas all the weird stuff, the outlying skills, they'll probably work at the beginner, maybe intermediate, not so much the advanced. And we see a lot of the times that, in wrestling and a lot of sports, you find that the higher the level, the more that the more you see the basics, right? But done really fucking well. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So, you know, um, that's sort of, yeah, been my take on it.
Yeah. Awesome, bro. And
Yeah.
I mean, so with these so how would you, I guess you talked about the American wrestling systems.
Hmm.
Obviously, they're some of the best in the world. How would you compare their systems to and their training styles compared to sort of what, like, other successful wrestling schools around the world will do? Like,
Yeah.
like, for example, the Russians or the Iranian,
Oh.
their approaches differ. And
Hmm.
I guess what you think is the most effective way. Like, there's a lot of some styles might go more high intensity. Some styles might go more low intensity. Some might wrestle every day. Some might just do some rounds once a week.
Yep. Yep.
So based on what you've learned and
Yep.
what you put a lot of work in studying these sorts of things, and I'm sure
Mm.
people want to know what you think the best approach is,
Mm.
um, in
Hmm.
terms of, like, a curriculum.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the only curriculum I believe we have access to is the American one, because it's all in
Hmm.
English, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and it's very clear. It's well established. It's available. You go on their
Hmm.
website. man, you can download an entire 4 to 6 year curriculum straight off the website.
I didn't know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's really good.
Yeah.
And you can buy this stuff off certain websites.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the best coaches in the world that are giving this information away for free, or you might have to pay.
Mm-hmm.
But I personally, I think it's a personal preference on the style that you wish to pursue. Me personally, I love the American style because it is very basic. It's just front headlock, single leg, double leg, attacks, offense, offense, defense. If you master those, then you can reach an extremely high level. I think I've checked out like some of the Japan systems online, just sort of, picked certain things. I think they train maybe a lot longer than what we do. Oh, sorry, the Americans do. They train maybe 3 hours twice a day or something like that. I think it's more than 2 hours. Where the Americans, they opt for shorter, more intense sessions. You know what I mean? So it might be maybe 1.5 to 2 hours max or something like that. Or they'll do shorter sessions, but multiple sessions a day. So 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour. They'll break it up, and then they'll adjust the theme of those sessions. So maybe the AM will be technique, drilling, light drilling, and then the PM will be, your high intensity live sparring. But I personally prefer the American style, probably because it's the one that I've studied the most, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I guess they're all sort of influencing each other, or trying to take stuff from each other anyway as well.
Yeah.
But from like not just from like taking into consideration skill acquisition, and also like I guess things like managing fatigue and stuff like that, because obviously you've got a good background in sports science as well. So in terms of like high intensity stuff, obviously wrestling, very explosive, high intensity energy requirements.
Yes.
But do you like in training, do you prefer more static drilling or like mixture, and how is it like sort of balancing those things? How do you balance those things in the best way to, I guess, perform well in comps?
For a wrestling session,
For a
wrestling
wrestler, yeah.
sessions.
Yeah.
I think it depends on, like, obviously, we have a concept in sports called periodization, where
Yeah.
you organize the entire year into different blocks,
Mm-hmm.
depending on when competitions are, the level of the athletes, what needs to be focused on, weaknesses, strengths, all that stuff. And then, you arrange all your training methods, your drilling, your activities around that. And so me personally, I pretty much do everything. It just depends on the time and, placing of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we're 12 weeks out, we're probably going to play a bit more games. We might experiment a bit more, playing certain, different positions that are probably not common, but it sort of enhances our learning and mixes things up a little bit. We might, maybe do some more non-specific warm-ups like the games and all the somersaults and backflips and stuff that you see online. But then obviously as we get closer to competition, then we try and implement methods that closely resemble competition. So that's a lot of live drilling and a lot of live positional sparring, live sparring, real wrestles, maybe shark tanking, that sort of stuff. And, just, work towards obviously what you're preparing yourself to do. And that's wrestle 2 3-minute periods with a 30-second rest period, because at the end of the day, that's what you're getting ready for. So that's what we're always sort of working towards.
Yeah, so like that specificity as well is important, but more so as you get closer to comp day or fight day.
Yeah, and that was massive. What you just mentioned there, being specific. I used to be so confused about pacing in wrestling
Mm-hmm.
I used to be confused because like I used to wrestle with like because there's different activities you can do like takedowns and which takedowns last for like 30 seconds. Someone gets a takedown, they get up, they go to the back of the line, and you might be resting for maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes maybe. So it's 30 seconds on, 1 to 2 minutes off. But wrestling is 3 minutes on, 30 seconds off, 3 minutes on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my pace was always like that 30-second pace.
Mm-hmm.
Go in, go nuts, which is okay, but you have to have a really deep understanding of pace. You have to know when you can, when to adjust your output based on the task, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you wrestle with like me, for me personally, some guys have crazy I know a bloke at my gym who just crazy conditioning, and he's a machine. He can like wrestle crazy for he's got an endless gas tank. But for me personally, like if I wrestled a 30-second pace in a 3-minute match or a 6-minute match, I'd gas out. So I had to really try and adjust my pace, my tactics, my strategies, and my skills. I had to organize all that to be able to last that duration. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
interesting. Yeah.
that
I
took
mean,
a lot.
sorry.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I've found like the same sort of thing even in striking, but I found it the opposite where you might be going a little bit too easy in training because you don't want to
yeah,
hurt your sparring partners, but then when
yes,
fight night comes, the pace is a lot higher.
yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah,
want to actually like explore that pace a little bit
yeah,
more with you because I
mm,
haven't really heard it from many other people actually
yeah,
talking about that.
yes,
So about the pacing, do you find
mm,
that you just find yourself going too easy, too hard in training for the smaller intervals, and then might have to pace yourself a little bit more, a little bit differently in comp, or maybe you're going too easy in training? Do you get both, or one or the other?
yeah. I for me, I think training partners for me played a massive role in understanding pace. Because if we have if you're maybe wrestling with someone who's a beginner and you've got maybe 3 or 4 years of experience, then obviously you're going to adjust your pace to match theirs. And that might be at a much lower pace than what's expected wrestling an intermediate or advanced guy, right? So if you're not, it's which is okay, but if you're not aware of that, you might fall into the trap of wrestling with a beginner mindset, so your pace drops, and then all of a sudden, when you come to wrestle someone who's an intermediate or advanced, similar or slightly better, it's a shock. You know what I mean? You're like, fuck, and you don't know
Yeah.
what to do, and you'll lose.
Hmm.
And to me, that's where all those sayings, iron sharpens iron, come from, and something that resonates with me a lot, and that I picked up from the Victorian Institute of Sport. I worked with the Australian state and national hockey team, right?
Hmm.
And their thing, they had a WhatsApp group, and in the image, they had like their mantras or something, and number one was train the way you want to compete. And I was just like, fuck, that's everything. It's
Yeah.
like you're training. The reason why you're training is to compete, So if you're training, if you're not training in a way uh, where in a way where you'll be competing, right? How you'll be competing, then something's wrong, right? Maybe your training partners aren't good enough, you know, um, or yeah. Well, for me, I feel like training partners is huge, massive.
For sure.
Like I reckon they help you set that pace,
Mhm.
um, and then I can think. I had another thing on my mind, but bloody forgotten. But
Was it about the
yeah, I think
pace, or was it about training partners, or
no, yeah, I think it's the training partners.
yeah?
Because I've been really hooked on that,
Hmm.
because for if you're training with beginners, then you're going to drop your pace to match theirs. If you're
Yeah.
training with medium to advanced, you're going to elevate your pace.
Mm-hmm.
And the pace, like what is the pace from a wrestling context? Well, it's you can set goals there. How often are you shooting? Is your hand fighting aggressive enough? You know what I mean? It's more of a skill-based approach rather than how hard am I going?
Mm-hmm.
Or you know, I don't know, just setting like mundane, subjective, sort of weird goals,
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, like, for me, I would say I'd look at how often I was shooting or how quickly am I getting to a setup,
Mm-hmm.
right? How quickly I would finish a takedown. Am I scrambling unnecessarily because I'm not getting the ankle, or when I'm taking the back, or am I not controlling someone's leg properly? Do you know what I mean? So I'll take a very sort of skill-based approach towards that. So, and that would dictate the pace.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really interesting how you sort of go about that. I guess it's like just keeping the pressure on,
yeah,
and in terms of managing the pace, like keeping that pressure on to the point where you're not going to gas out. You're not just shooting for the leg and exposing yourself every 5 seconds, but you're still
yeah,
keeping them busy with hand fighting and maybe snaps
mm,
and stuff like that.
yeah,
So yeah, I think there's a lot that people can take from that for sure.
yeah.
But
And I sort of pull that from, like, GSP, how he
yeah,
talks like a
yeah,
lot about efficiency. He
like
doesn't really
yeah,
talk about. Yeah, I think there was a video once where he was talking about conditioning, and he
mm-hmm,
said that he doesn't really believe in that because it's all about efficiency.
mm-hmm,
Because you could be the fittest guy in the world, but if you're not finishing your takedowns, if you're shooting when you shouldn't, from
mm,
far away and getting sprawled on, and there's athletes out there who know how to gas other wrestlers out. You know
yeah,
what I mean? They're really smart that way. So
mm,
if you don't have that technical, tactical aptitude, doesn't matter how fit you are, you're always going to get gassed. You know what I
yeah,
mean? But if you take like a skill-based approach, then you can, how often am I snapping? Can I snap this guy more than once in a minute or some shit? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Um, then yeah, that can make a huge difference. For me, that made a
yeah.
difference.
What are
Yeah,
some like I guess practical approaches that like someone can take in order
mm,
to uh I guess you're talking about a skills based approach to this. What are some
yeah,
things that people can like implement immediately into their training to work on those things that you're talking about in terms of like taking a skill based approach? Is it just in the live rounds, or and what sort of things are they going to focus on there?
yeah, yeah. I think yeah, live rounds for me is probably the biggest one. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just coming up with a lot of different ways to isolate skills and
Mm-hmm.
then making it live, making it real. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Um, so I mean, like, at a wrestling intensity.
Yeah.
And for me, like, those positional is really big in wrestling. So starting from that front headlock position and wrestling from
Mm-hmm.
there, wrestling from a single leg position in different ways. I think you might have even been at one of the classes where we did
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we've done that a couple times, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it was
and we'd
yeah.
wrestle from the single leg, but we came up with all these different positions. Like, it
Mm,
was on the ground, up top, laying
mm,
flat on your belly,
yeah,
um, shooting into a single leg, getting sprawled on, then working from there.
yeah,
So all these creative ways to replicate the exact scenario in a competition and
yeah.
making it feel real, right? And sort of repping that out, just repping it,
Mm-hmm.
repping it until it becomes instinct.
100%.
Um, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think earlier I used to, like, it was a bit of a mentality shift. Like, I had to make it real in my head,
Mm,
you know what I mean? And apply that level of intensity, right?
mm-hmm.
And then again, the training partners make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there were guys from AET, which is another club that we train at, AET and ZAR, who are monumental in helping me nail my techniques. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So otherwise, I wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to improve at all.
for
You'd
sure.
always get away with the same technique, half-assed sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the partner sort of thing that we were going into.
Mhm.
Um, so like uh, in like boxing, I've heard from various coaches, and this is sort of um, my point of view as well. I agree with is that if you're sparring someone who's like less than you can experiment with new things. If you're sparring
Mhm.
someone who's the same as you, then you try and do your best, and that's going to be you're going to be matched with a type of guy like that. So you do
Yeah.
what you would do in the fight as well. And if you're
Yeah.
sparring someone better than you work on what you're best at to, I
Yeah.
guess, try and you know uh, protect yourself as best as you can, and do the best you can.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
When it comes to like that in a wrestling context, do you try and have the same approach to try and get the most out of each training partner,
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
do you prefer to just go like with people who are just better or the same level as you?
No.
Or yeah.
Yeah. No. I think this was probably in the last 2 to 3 years. You know how we're talking about pace and going
Hmm.
easy on people who are starting out. I used to
Yeah.
do that a lot,
Yeah.
right? And I used to get lazy and
Yeah.
complacent, right?
Mm.
And then I used to cheat a little bit because I used to get like maybe simpler moves like arm drags and stuff.
Hmm.
And then these guys still had strength, they had power, they could sprawl, but they weren't obviously being beginners. They didn't have the technique and stuff. But I found that when I'd shoot on those guys, I wasn't able to completely finish a single leg, right? But I
Hmm.
could get some other fancy move like an arm drag
Hmm.
or a duck under and then I was like, wait, all right, I can get all these fancy moves, but I can't finish a single leg. I'm going to practice. I think this is a bit of a turning point for me. I said, regardless of who I'm with, I'm going to practice the same stuff.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Because I've seen it in some competitions. Like you'll see a wrestler go up against a high level MMA guy, and they got crazy gas tank, hard to keep them down, strong, the will to win. They've got all that, and
Hmm.